and play on 2nd and 10. That's his youth right there.
Tagovailoa trying to make up for it. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown! Alabama wins!
Today I'll be filming my college football way too early top 25 rankings for 2026. But this time I'll be breaking it up into two parts. I'll do 1 through 12 today and 13 through 25 in a few days. So it's called way too early for a reason. So I've not done near enough research to be able to do a great top 25 at this time, and my final top 25 that I'll do a week or so before the season begins will no doubt look quite a bit different than this does. But this does not mean that I think Indiana is winning the national championship or that I think that Tennessee is going to be the 25th best team. But I've got Indiana number one because they just won the national championship and they have Kirk Cincinnati. And the biggest reason why I think Indiana won the national championship is because of how disciplined Cincinnati had this team. They hardly ever got penalties and hardly ever turned the ball over and hardly ever dropped balls and hardly ever missed tackles and they hardly ever had busted coverages. And Indiana also returns maybe the two best coordinators in college football right now, Mike Shanahan at offensive coordinator and Bryant Haynes at defensive coordinator, who just won the award for being the best assistant coach in college football in 2025. And Josh Hoover has been one of college football's best quarterbacks these past two seasons. And they do have to replace a couple of really good wide receivers and running backs. But they do get Charlie Becker back at wide receiver, and I think he's going to have a breakout year. And they did bring in a couple of good wide receivers through the transfer portal, and I still think their run game is going to be good because their offensive line, I think, is going to be really good again because they have three starters coming back. Now, they do lose a lot of good players on defense, and some of those players like D'Angelo Pons and Aiden Fisher and Mikel Kamara probably can't quite be replaced. But Indiana did make some big portal additions on defense too. And while the roster probably won't be quite as good as it was last year, they have enough coming back and did well enough in the transfer portal that I don't think there'll be much of a drop off for Indiana this year. Number two, I've got Oregon because they have Dan Lanning, and whatever you think about him, you can't deny that he's a winner. And they return Dante Moore at quarterback. He's one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And they're loaded at wide receiver, and the running back room is going to be really good again. Now, they do have to replace three starters on their offensive line, but something to know is last year, Oregon had to replace four starters on their offensive line, and they did fine. And Oregon returns eight starters on defense, including their whole starting defensive line. And their defensive line, all of them were going to be highly drafted players this year. So, number three, I've got Miami. So, Mario Cristobal returns his great staff, Shannon Dawson at offensive coordinator and Corey Heatherman at defensive coordinator. And Darian Mensah is a great quarterback. And they return Mark Fletcher at running back who was great in the playoffs, one of the best running backs in college football, and they return Malachi Tony at wide receiver, one of the most fun players to watch in college football.
He's got it on the pitch. Tony breaks free. Malachi Tony spinning, scoring.
Now, their offensive line is going to have to be rebuilt, but I would trust Mario Cristobal to be able to do that. Now, I don't think they can replace Ruben Bain or Akeem Messidor, but they did make a couple of big additions in the transfer portal on defense and have enough coming back on that side of the ball that I think their defense is going to be really good again. And number four, I've got Ohio State because they have Ryan Day, and whatever you think about him, you can't argue against that he's a winner. And Julian Sayin comes back at quarterback, and he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Now they do lose a Carnell Tate at wide receiver, but they do return the best wide receiver in the country, Jeremiah Smith, and Bo Jackson at running back, one of the best in college football. And they return four starting offensive linemen. Now on the defensive side, they do have a lot to replace. And Caleb Downs, I don't think can be replaced, but they actually lost even more on defense last year than they do this year, and they do return Matt Patricia at defensive coordinator, who is the top three defensive coordinator in the country, in my opinion. And the numbers got even better last year than the year before, even with as much as they lost. And they did get a couple of big portal pickups on at defense. So I expect Ohio State's defense to be one of the best in the country again. So five, I've got Georgia. One reason is they've got Kirby Smart, and while he may not be the best coach in the country anymore, if you don't have him in your top three, you just hate Georgia, I think. And he returns his great staff, Mike Bobo at offensive coordinator, and Glenn Schumann at defensive coordinator, and Gunnar Stockton comes back at quarterback. That's good news for Georgia. And they've got Nate Frazier coming back at running back, and they will miss Zachariah Branch at wide receiver. He gave them what they didn't have the year before at wide receiver, but they returned three starters on their offensive line, and they returned quite a bit on defense. I think, like usual, their defense will be one of the best in the country. Six, I've got Texas. So Arch Manning, I think, is again going to be the preseason Heisman favorite, and Steve Sarkisian will be calling plays on offense again, and their wide receiver room should be good, and the run game should be much better. Because the offensive line, I think, is going to be much better with all they have coming back there. And while it's not good to lose running backs Weisner and Baxter, I actually think the two new running backs they brought in, Hollywood Smothers and Raleek Brown, are actually even better running backs than those two are. Now, they do have a lot to replace on defense, but they do get Colin Simmons back, who is one of college football's best defensive players. And they bring in Will Muschamp to be the defensive coordinator, and he was a head coach at two different SEC schools, and he was a terrible head coach, but he is a really good defensive coordinator. At seven, I've got Ole Miss. The biggest reason for that is Trinidad Chambliss got approved to play this season, and I think he's the top quarterback in college football.
Great fan base, very welcoming to all here in Oxford. Pump fake, and Chambliss going downtown. Trey Wallace makes the grab.
And Kaiwan Lacey comes back, and I think he's the top running back in college football. And again, they're loaded at wide receiver. And Pete Golding did a good job coaching in the playoffs. Now, it's still not known for sure how good of a head coach he is because while he did beat Georgia and Lane Kiffin didn't, that was still Lane Kiffin that built that team. But Ole Miss had the 18th ranked transfer portal group, and I go by the website On3 to get my portal rankings because it doesn't just go by who they got. It also includes who they lost. And for there to have been a coaching change, I'd say Ole Miss did really well in the transfer portal. And they only returned 5 starters on defense, but their defense should be solid under Pete Golding. And they returned Lucas Carnero, the best kicker in college football, and their offensive line should be solid again. So number 8, I've got Texas A&M. So I really like Mike Elko. I think he's one of college football's best head coaches right now, and a defensive genius. He makes it really confusing for his opponent's offense. And Marcel Reed comes back at quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And while they do lose Casey Concepcion at wide receiver, they do return Mario Craver, and they do return Ruben Owens at running back. The concerning part for Texas A&M is they lose 4 starters on their offensive line, and their offensive line was great for them all year last year until those last 2 games that they lost. But Texas A&M leaned heavily on their offensive line last year because their offense in those last 2 games when the line struggled was terrible. But then all year before that, when it was playing great, the offense was scoring a whole lot of points. Now they do lose a lot on defense, but they did make a few big portal additions on that side of the ball. I think their defense will be pretty good again. And 9, I've got Notre Dame. So I saw they return 69% of their production, which is a lot. And I love Marcus Freeman as a coach, and he returns his staff, Mike Denbrock, who's a very good offensive coordinator, and Chris Ash, the defensive coordinator, who, after the first few games of the season, I thought maybe was a bust hire, but then he did get it turned around and ended up overall doing a pretty good job with their defense. And CJ Carr comes back at quarterback. That's good news for them. Now, they do have to replace 2 really good running backs, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, but Jordan Faison comes back at wide receiver, and they do get 4 starters back on their offensive line, and they've got a lot coming back on the defensive side too. One is LSU. So while I'm not extremely confident that Lane Kiffin will work out at LSU in the long run, because to work out at LSU, you have to win a national championship. And even if you do, your job isn't secure there for long. But I would like LSU chances of winning a national championship under Lane Kiffin a lot more than had they kept Brian Kelly. And Lane Kiffin is no doubt going to win a lot of games at LSU these next several years. And LSU finished with the second ranked transfer portal group in the country. And their offense, I think, is going to be pretty good, actually. Sam Levitt has been one of college football's top quarterbacks in these past 2 years. But how good the offense will be is going to depend a lot on if Lane Kiffin can fix an offensive line that really struggled last year. And on defense, they do lose a lot of good players, but they do get Whit Weeks back, who was one of the best players in college football before getting injured. And their defense is getting two of Lane Kiffin's players from Ole Miss that were good ones, Prince Wellamon Mielen and TJ Daughtery. And Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator, I think is one of the best in the country. So their defense should be pretty good. Again, and number 11, I've got Michigan. So the biggest reason for this is they've got Kyle Whittingham, who had 8 10+ win seasons in 21 years at Utah. So I think Bryce Underwood at quarterback is going to be improved this year. And their wide receiver room, though, is still not that good, but their run game, I think, is going to be really good because they get Jordan Marshall back at running back, and their offensive line is going to be really good, I think, because they've got a lot coming back there. And defensively, their secondary, I think, is going to be near the top of college football, but they do lose a lot in their front at seven. And they only had the 66th overall transfer portal group, but overall their defense I think is going to be very good. And number 12, I've got Texas Tech. So even though Texas Tech does lose a lot, they did reload in the transfer portal, having the third-ranked transfer portal group, and have enough coming back that I don't think there'll be much, if any, of a drop off. They bring in Brendan Sorsby, the quarterback from Cincinnati, who I think is actually an upgrade over uh, Bayron Morton. He's certainly a much better runner than Morton is, and their running back room is going to be really good again. And they're going to miss Caleb Douglas at wide receiver, but they brought in a couple of good wide receivers from the transfer portal, and their offensive line should be solid again. Now, their defensive line is going to take a pretty big step back, I think, but their linebacker room and secondary, I think, are both going to be really strong. So that'll be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.